My name is Vorrakan Thessu, and I have commanded fleets across 47 star systems. I have watched suns collapse. I have negotiated surrender treaties with species so ancient they had forgotten their own homeworlds. I have, in my long and distinguished career, never once been caught completely off guard by anything, until the day I met Commander Dara Osei. Let me set the stage for you, because context matters here, and I want you to understand exactly how confident I was before everything went sideways. The Galactic Coordination Assembly, which is the very polite name we use for the governing body that tells every species in the known galaxy what they are and are not allowed to do, had finally accepted humanity into full membership. After 2 decades of observation, countless behavioral studies, 3 separate diplomatic incidents involving something humans call hot sauce, and 1 genuinely baffling situation where a human ambassador arm-wrestled a Drakthorian elder, and 1, the Assembly had decided that humans were, and I am quoting the official document here, sufficiently socialized for interstellar participation. I was assigned as their military liaison. My superiors thought this was an honor. I suspected, privately, that it was punishment for something I had done, and not yet been caught for. The first meeting was held on Verath Station, which sits at the edge of the Charon Nebula, and smells faintly of ammonia and bureaucratic despair. The station itself is a magnificent structure of spiraling corridors and observation decks, built over 300 years by the combined engineering efforts of 9 species. It is objectively breathtaking. Dara Osei walked in, looked around once, and said, "So it is basically a space airport. I want you to know that I had spent considerable time preparing for this introduction. I had studied human customs, I had practiced the handshake, I had even at great personal cost to my dignity, watched 17 hours of human entertainment programming to understand their cultural references. None of that prepared me for Dara Osei. She was a small human, by human standards, which still put her roughly chest height on me, since my species, the Vethan, average around 2.5 meters. She had dark skin, close-cropped hair, and the kind of eyes that looked like they were always doing math. She wore a human military uniform with an insignia I later learned meant she commanded an entire battalion, and she carried a small metal container that I would discover was filled with a beverage she called the good stuff, and which my medical scanner nearly filed an emergency report about. She looked at me, I looked at her. I had prepared a formal greeting, 18 sentences long, as is proper among my people. She said, "You must be Vorrakan. I heard you are the best they have. Good, that means I will actually learn something." And then she shook my hand before I could even open my mouth. I stood there, all 2.5 meters of decorated military career, holding a handshake I had not initiated, with absolutely nothing to say. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already mapped 3 exits out of the room and was currently deciding whether she needed any of them. "So," she said, releasing my hand and glancing at the mission brief on the table, "we are supposed to run joint tactical exercises for 6 weeks, figure out how human forces can integrate with the Assembly fleet, and produce a report that nobody will read. Sound about right?" "The report will be read," I said, because I had to say something. "By who?" "By the Assembly Strategic Committee." When was the last time the Assembly Strategic Committee changed anything because of a report? I opened my mouth. I closed it. I thought about the 47 star systems. I thought about my career. "The report will be thorough," I said. She laughed. It was a loud, genuine sound, nothing like the polite vocalizations I had studied in the cultural preparation files. This was laughter with no apology in it. "I like you already, Vorrakan," she said. "Okay. Let me see the tactical scenarios." This was day 1. I had no idea what was coming. The first exercise was a standard engagement simulation, a classic assembly defensive formation called the Verath Shield, named after the very station we stood in. It is a formation used across the galaxy, taught in every military academy from the outer rim to the core systems. 300 years of battlefield refinement, mathematically optimized response times. I had personally used it 11 times in live combat, and 11 times it had worked. I explained the formation to Commander Osei with great thoroughness. I showed her the simulation projections. I walked her through the engagement angles, the communication sequences, the retreat protocols. I was, if I may say, an excellent teacher. She listened to the entire explanation without interrupting once, which I found pleasantly respectful, and then she said, "What happens if the enemy already knows the formation?" "All formations carry some risk of being studied by opponents," I said, "because this is a standard acknowledged limitation. No, I mean what happens specifically with this formation if someone knows it. Walk me through it. So I did. And as I walked through it, I noticed something uncomfortable happening in the back of my mind. A very quiet, very inconvenient voice that sounded a great deal like tactical doubt. The left flank, she said, pointing at the holographic display, opens up for exactly 4.2 seconds during the communication handshake between Units 9 and 12, right here. I looked at where she was pointing. She was not wrong. That window, she continued, setting down her metal container and pulling up a secondary simulation I had not given her, one she had apparently prepared herself before our meeting, is enough for a fast-strike unit to punch through and fracture the rear formation. Your third-line support vessels would have maybe 30 seconds before the whole thing collapses inward. I stared at the simulation. Where did you get those numbers? I asked. I ran the exercise 3 times last night using the station's public simulation terminal, she said. The access code was admin. You might want to change that. There was a pause that I would describe, if I were being honest, as profound. The Verath shield, I said carefully, has been in use for 300 years. Yeah, she said, with the tone of someone who had expected exactly this response. And whoever you have been fighting for 300 years has probably figured that out too. You have just been lucky they did not have the right equipment to exploit it, or the right timing, or both. She picked up her container again. Also, and I say this respectfully, your communication handshake protocol takes way too long. What is that, like a 2-second confirmation sequence? In 2 seconds I can do a lot of rude things to your left flank. I looked at my aide, Sub-Commander Pelrath Vor, who had been standing silently against the wall throughout this exchange. Pelrath was young, meticulous, and had a deep personal commitment to traditional assembly doctrine. He looked like someone had told him the sun was rising from the wrong direction. The confirmation sequence, Pelrath said with great dignity, ensures accurate signal verification between units. Absolutely, said Commander Osei, and it also ensures that anyone who has studied your doctrine for 5 minutes knows exactly when you are momentarily blind. But sure, accurate signal verification, very important. Pelrath made a sound I had never heard him make before. I do not have a precise translation for it, but it was somewhere between offense taken and she might have a point. We ran the simulation her way. It was faster, it was meaner. It closed the flank gap by nearly 80%. It also violated 3 separate assembly tactical regulations, which Dara Osei was aware of and deeply unconcerned about. You cannot implement a formation that violates regulations, I told her. You cannot, she agreed pleasantly, but you can recommend that the regulations be reviewed, which is different. Besides, we are in an exercise. Let the report say the formation is non-compliant. Let the strategic committee argue about it in their meeting. Meetings are for arguing. Battlefields are for winning. I did not have an immediate response to that. She looked at me with those calculating eyes and said, Vorrakan, how long has the Assembly been fighting the Drokan Collective? The Drokan Collective, the Assembly's primary ongoing conflict, a species of highly organized, highly aggressive warriors who had been pressing against the outer border territories for decades, winning slow ground and losing nothing of significant consequence. 62 years, I said. 62 years, she repeated, and her voice had changed. The humor was still there, but underneath it something sharper, something that made the room feel a little less comfortable. 62 years of the same formations, the same doctrine, the same response patterns, and they are still there, pushing, still advancing, still taking ground, slowly, one engagement at a time. I said nothing. Have you ever considered, she said, that the reason they keep advancing is not because they are stronger than you, but because you keep doing exactly what they expect you to do? The room was very quiet. Pelrath made that sound again. Outside the observation window, the Charon Nebula glowed in shades of orange and deep violet, completely indifferent to the fact that in this small room, a human commander had just said out loud the thing that 2 generations of assembly generals had carefully avoided putting into words. That, I said slowly, is a significant accusation. It is an observation, she said. A pretty obvious one, once you run the numbers. She pulled up a data display, something she had clearly been building for longer than our single day of acquaintance. It was detailed, it was sourced, it referenced 62 years of engagement data. Your doctrine is excellent, it is well designed, well drilled, and completely predictable. The Drokan Collective has had 62 years to study it. At this point, they do not need to be smarter than you. They just need to keep reading the same book you keep writing. I sat down. This is notable because my species considers sitting in the presence of a subordinate officer to be mildly informal. I sat down anyway because my legs had on some instinctive level decided this was a sitting conversation. "What are you proposing?" I asked. Dara Osei smiled. Not the calculating smile from before, something different. The smile of someone who had been waiting a long time to have this conversation with someone who would actually listen. "I am proposing," she said, "that we stop writing the same book." She opened a new projection, one that filled the entire room with light, formations I had never seen, movement patterns that looked frankly disorganized, until you looked at them long enough to realize they were not disorganized at all, but something far more unsettling. They were unpredictable. "Humans," she said, stepping into the light of the projection, "have been fighting each other for about as long as your species has been mapping stars. We have fought with everything from rocks to railguns. We have fought in deserts, oceans, mountains, cities, space, and, memorably, a shopping mall in 2031. But that is a story for another time. And the one thing we learned, the hard, expensive, very bloody way, is that the moment your enemy can predict you, you are already losing." She looked at me across the glow of the projection. "Your enemy can predict you, Vorrakan." Outside, the nebula burned quietly. Pelrath was utterly still against the wall, and I noticed with some amusement that he had stopped making sounds and started taking notes. I looked at the formations in the projection. I looked at Commander Dara Osei, this small human who had walked into my carefully prepared briefing room and in the space of a single afternoon dismantled 62 years of military convention with math, a metal container of questionable beverage, and the calm confidence of someone who had been right before and expected to be right again. "Show me," I said. She nodded. No triumph in it, just purpose. "From the beginning," she said, and pulled up the first slide. It was going to be a very long 6 weeks. 6 weeks, that was what the Assembly had given us. 6 weeks of joint tactical exercises, cross-species coordination drills, and enough bureaucratic paperwork to flatten a small moon. 6 weeks. And then Commander Dara Osei would return to her battalion. I would return to my post, and the Assembly Strategic Committee would read our report during a meeting that would last 3 hours longer than necessary and change absolutely nothing. That was the plan. The plan lasted approximately 9 days. On day 9, a Drokan collective strike force hit the outer monitoring station at Karen Perimeter 3, which was, by remarkable and deeply inconvenient coincidence, less than 2 light hours from Verath station, where Dara Osei and I were currently standing in the middle of a training simulation, arguing about communication lag. The alert came in at 0314 station time, which is the hour specifically designed to make sure you are at maximum cognitive disadvantage when receiving bad news. Pelrath Val came running into the simulation bay, looking like he had personally offended every deity his species had ever invented. "General Thessu," he said, slightly breathless, "Karen Perimeter 3 is under active assault. The 44th Assembly Border Patrol is engaging, but they are requesting immediate tactical support from the nearest command-qualified officer." I was already moving toward the command terminal. "What is the assault profile?" I asked. 3 Drokan heavy carriers, 2 fast strike columns, standard encirclement formation. Standard encirclement. I pulled up the tactical feed. "They are running the Harrow pattern." "Yes, sir." The Harrow pattern. One of the Drokan collective's most reliable assault formations. I had seen it 11 times in my career. I knew exactly how it worked, where it committed, and how to counter it. There was a response in Assembly doctrine specifically designed for it, a counter called the Open Gate Response, which I had drilled into my crews until they could execute it in their sleep. I began entering the command sequence for the Open Gate Response. Dara Osei was standing at my shoulder. She had appeared there, silently and somehow instantly, in the way she always appeared whenever something operationally interesting was happening, as if she had an internal sensor tuned specifically to moments that mattered. She looked at the tactical feed. She looked at my command entry. She looked at the tactical feed again. "Vorrakan," she said, "I am aware of your concerns," I told her, "but this is an active engagement, not a simulation, which is exactly why I am saying this now instead of politely waiting," she said. "They know you are going to run the Open Gate Response. The Open Gate Response is the correct counter to the Harrow pattern. The Open Gate Response is the correct counter to the Harrow pattern, and they know that, and they are running the Harrow pattern on purpose, because they want you to run the Open Gate Response." My fingers stopped above the command terminal. "Look at the carrier positioning," she said. pointing at 3 markers on the tactical feed. Those carriers are not in optimal Harrow pattern positions. They are offset by about 8 degrees each. A Harrow pattern with offset carriers is not a standard Harrow pattern. It is a Harrow pattern with modifications. They have modified it. I looked at the carrier positions. She was right. The offset was subtle, the kind of thing you would miss if you were already pattern matching to a known formation and not looking at the actual data in front of you. Which was, of course, exactly the point. If you run the open gate response against a modified Harrow pattern with those carrier positions, she continued very quickly and very calmly, your flanking units are going to overextend toward the false gap the carriers are creating, and then those 2 fast strike columns are going to punch through your rear line while you are busy congratulating yourself on countering an attack that was never the real attack, Pelrath said, with what I thought was admirable composure for someone whose entire military education was currently being rewritten in real time. How do you know all of this from 8 degrees of carrier offset? Because I spent 3 days last week analyzing every recorded Drokan engagement from the last 12 years, Dara Osei said, with the straightforwardness of someone who considers 3 days of historical combat analysis to be a perfectly normal way to spend a week, and they have been slowly, quietly, incrementally modifying their own formations for the last 4 years. Tiny changes, nothing dramatic enough to flag in after-action reports. Just 8 degrees here, a 2-second timing shift there. They have been testing whether anyone notices. She paused. Nobody noticed. The alert tone from Karen Perimeter 3 pulsed again. Somewhere out there, the 44th Border Patrol was holding a line against a formation that was specifically engineered to destroy whatever I was about to send at it. What do we do? I asked. And here is the thing about Dara Osei that I want you to understand clearly, because this is the moment, this specific moment, standing at a command terminal at 0314 station time with an active assault 2 light hours away, where I realized that everything I had assumed about human military thinking was not just incomplete, it was fundamentally backward. I had been briefed on humans as a species that fought with passion over precision, with aggression over strategy, with individual initiative in ways that sometimes produced brilliance and sometimes produced catastrophe. The assessment files I had read described humans as tactically creative but structurally unpredictable, which is assembly diplomatic language for impressive but dangerous to work with. What those files had entirely missed was that the unpredictability was not a flaw, it was the weapon. Dara Osei looked at the tactical feed for exactly 4 seconds. I counted. 4 seconds of absolute stillness, eyes moving across the data with that expression I had come to recognize. The one that meant she was not looking at what was there but at what everything that was there implied. Then she said, "Do not counter the Harrow pattern. Counter what comes after the Harrow pattern fails." Pelrath looked at me. I looked at Dara Osei. "Explain," I said. "The modified Harrow pattern is designed to collapse when the open gate response engages, drawing your flanking units out of position. That collapse is the trigger for their real move, the fast strike columns punching through the rear. So instead of running the open gate response, we do something they have never seen from assembly forces. We do not counter the Harrow pattern at all. We let it run. We hold our flanking units in place. We pull the rear line tighter instead of opening it, and we redirect 2 of our fastest response units to positions here and here." She pointed at 2 locations on the feed that were currently empty of both friend and enemy, which puts them directly in the path the fast strike columns have to use if they want to exploit the gap the carrier offset is supposed to create. "We let the Harrow pattern run," I repeated, because I wanted to be absolutely sure I was hearing this. "We let the Harrow pattern run. The carriers will start their offset maneuver. The columns will begin their approach run, expecting a rear line that is already compromised. Instead, they will find 2 response units sitting exactly where they need to be, and the only way their formation survives at that point is to abort the column strike, which pulls momentum from the entire attack." "And if you are wrong?" Pelrath asked. "If I am wrong," she said, "then the Harrow pattern runs unopposed for about 90 seconds longer than it should. The 44th Border Patrol has a rough time, and we run the open gate response while the Drokan formation is still recovering from not finding the rear gap they expected. We are not worse off than if we had run the standard counter from the beginning. We are just 90 seconds behind." She said it with perfect calm. The calm of someone who had at some point in their life made decisions in worse situations than this and come out the other side carrying the lesson rather than the wound. I entered the revised command sequence. It was against doctrine. It violated 2 separate assembly tactical regulations. It was based entirely on 4 seconds of analysis by a human officer who had been my liaison for 9 days. I entered it anyway. What happened over the next 40 minutes at Karen Perimeter 3 became, and I say this without exaggeration, because I have read the after-action reports from 17 different observers, the most discussed engagement in assembly military history since the Third Karen conflict. The Drokan carriers ran their offset maneuver. The 44th Border Patrol held formation. The assembly flanking units did not move. The fast strike columns began their approach, reading the tactical situation as exactly what it was supposed to look like, an assembly force about to run the standard open gate response. Rear line open, flanks extended, vulnerable. They found our 2 response units instead. The column strike aborted. The carrier formation, designed for a specific sequence of events that was no longer occurring, lost cohesion. The Drokan force spent 6 minutes reorienting to a situation their doctrine had no ready answer for, and in those 6 minutes the 44th Border Patrol, supported by the redirected response units, closed from 3 directions simultaneously. The Drokan force withdrew, not destroyed, not captured, withdrawn, which, if you know anything about the Drokan collective, is itself remarkable, because they do not withdraw from engagements they initiate unless the tactical calculation has changed so completely that continuing serves no purpose. We had changed the calculation in 40 minutes, with a formation adjustment that violated assembly regulations and made absolutely no sense by any standard doctrine. Pelrath Vorko sat down on the floor of the command bay, not in a chair. On the floor. I had known Pelrath for 11 years, and I had never once seen him sit on a floor. He sat on the floor and stared at the tactical feed showing the retreating Drokan formation, and he said, quietly, "They ran. They ran." Dara Osei confirmed, picking up her metal container from where she had set it at the beginning of the engagement, and taking a long, satisfied drink. "Because we did not do what they expected," I said. "Because you did not do what they expected," she said, looking at me. "You did it, Vorrakan. I just read the map. I looked at the tactical feed. I looked at the empty space where 3 Drokan heavy carriers and 2 fast strike columns had been. I thought about 62 years. I thought about doctrine. I thought about 300 years of formations that everyone had studied, and enemies who had studied them most of all. The report," I said. "The report nobody will read," she said, with a small smile. "The report that the Strategic Committee is going to read very carefully," I told her, "because I am going to walk into that committee room myself and stand there until they do." She looked at me for a moment, assessing something. Then she nodded. "You know what they are going to say," she told me. "They are going to say it was a single engagement, anomalous result, insufficient data for doctrinal revision. They are going to say that one successful non-standard engagement does not justify rewriting 300 years of tactical development." "Yes," I agreed. "And you are going to push anyway." "I am going to push anyway." She smiled, fully, this time without the calculation behind it. Just the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for someone in a position of authority to say those exact words. "Then we have a lot of work to do," she said, "and I am going to need a bigger whiteboard." What came after that is, technically, a separate story. It involves 3 separate hearings before the Assembly Strategic Committee, a formal doctrinal review board that took 8 months, and the vocal support of 14 senior generals who had quietly agreed with Dara Osei's analysis from the moment they read the Karen Perimeter 3 engagement report. It involves Pelrath Var, who submitted his own supplementary analysis comparing 62 years of Drokan engagement modifications, and produced a document so thorough that the committee chair reportedly read it twice, and then asked for a 3rd copy. It involves a training program, eventually called the Adaptive Response Initiative, that today is taught in every assembly military academy from the outer rim to the core systems. And it involves one small metal container, which Dara Osei left on my desk on the last day of our official 6-week liaison assignment, along with a note that said, in her precise, unhurried handwriting, "For when the next meeting runs long, do not let them bore you into agreement. The galaxy needs you difficult." I keep the container on my desk to this day. I have never opened it, because my medical scanner still has concerns, but that is not the point. The point is that a human commander walked into a station smelling of ammonia and bureaucratic despair, called it a space airport, shook my hand before I could object, and then spent 6 weeks and 9 days quietly, thoroughly, and with extraordinary patience, dismantling the comfortable certainty that 3 centuries of tactical doctrine had built around us. She did not do it with superior firepower. She did not do it with a larger fleet or more advanced technology. She did it with the thing her species had spent all of its considerable, complicated, frequently disastrous history learning to value above everything else. The willingness to do the thing nobody expects. My name is Vorrakan Thessu. I have commanded fleets across 47 star systems. I have watched suns collapse, and I have negotiated surrenders, and I have stood in 42 years of decorated military service without once being truly surprised by anything, until the day I met Commander Dara Osei. And I mean that as the highest compliment I am capable of giving.